The morning air bit at my knuckles as I pushed through the glass doors of the hospital, my breath fogging in the Boston chill. I was 42, healthy as far as I knew, running a firm that kept the lights on at home, playing chess with buddies on weekends, living a life I thought I'd earned. The headaches had started a few months back, sharp, nagging things I blamed on late nights crunching numbers or arguing with contractors. Stress, I told myself. Nothing a good vacation wouldn't fix. But the call from my doctor's office last week had been too urgent, too serious. "We need you to come in," the receptionist said, her voice tight. So there I was, sitting in a room with pale green walls and a clock that ticked louder than it should, waiting for answers I didn't want. Dr. Kaplan walked in, his face calm but heavy, like he'd practiced this moment. He sat across from me, a clipboard in his lap, and started talking about test results, scans, blood counts. I heard fragments, nodes, abnormal, biopsy, but it all blurred until he said the word that cut through the fog: lymphoma. Stage 2. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something heavier, like the air itself had thickened. "Treatable," he said, "if we started right away. Chemotherapy, maybe radiation, a plan we'd build together." He asked if I had questions, but my mind was blank, a white sheet pulled over everything I thought I knew. I nodded, said I'd call to schedule the next steps, and stood to leave. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else. Outside, the cold slapped me awake. I leaned against a brick wall, my phone heavy in my coat pocket. I needed to tell her. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with for 12 years. We'd met in college, laughed through late-night study sessions, promised each other forever in a small church with stained glass windows. She'd know what to do, how to make this feel less like the ground was falling away. I dialed her number, my fingers clumsy, and waited as it rang. When she answered, her voice was soft, distracted, like she was half listening to something else. "Hey, what's up?" she said, and I could hear music in the background, faint laughter. I told her everything. Dr. Kaplan, the diagnosis, the treatment plan. I didn't sugarcoat it because I never had to with her. I waited for her to say something, anything, to fill the silence that stretched too long. Finally, she spoke, her tone steady but distant. "We'll get through this," she said, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. I asked if she could come home, maybe sit with me tonight, so we could talk it through. She hesitated, then said she was tied up with work, a project that couldn't wait. "Tomorrow, okay?" she promised, and I said sure, because what else could I say? I hung up, my throat tight, and drove home through streets that felt unfamiliar, like I was seeing them for the first time. The house was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Her coat wasn't on the rack, her shoes not by the door. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, even the guest room where she sometimes worked late. Nothing. I texted her, just a quick, "You okay?" But the message sat unread. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the TV without turning it on. My mind kept circling back to Dr. Kaplan's office, the way his pen tapped the clipboard, the way he said treatable, like it was supposed to make everything okay. I wanted to call someone else, my brother, my dad, a friend, but my phone felt like a brick, too heavy to lift again. I thought about the firm, the deadlines piling up, the clients who didn't care about my headaches or my blood counts. I thought about the chessboard in the den, the game I'd left half-finished with a buddy who always cheated but made me laugh. I thought about her, the way she used to curl up next to me on nights like this, her hair tickling my cheek. Where was she? I checked my phone again, still no reply. The clock on the wall ticked past 9, then 10. I told myself she'd walk through the door any minute, her arms full of apologies, her voice warm with worry. But the hours stretched, and the house stayed empty. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my body heavy, like I was carrying more than just myself. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at her pillow, untouched and smooth. My head throbbed, not from the lymphoma but from something else, something I couldn't name. I replayed our call, her words, the way they felt like a script she'd read before. "We'll get through this." It should have meant more, should have carried the weight of 12 years together. But it didn't. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, willing the morning to bring her back, to make this feel like something we could face side by side. When I woke, the bed was still empty. Sunlight cut through the blinds, sharp and unwelcome. I checked my phone, nothing. I walked downstairs, hoping for a note, a sign she'd been here and left early. The kitchen was as I'd left it, the water glass still on the counter. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the sink, and felt the truth settle in my bones. She hadn't come home. Not last night, not this morning. I was alone with this thing, lymphoma, stage 2, treatable, and the woman I thought would stand by me wasn't here. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared out the window at the street, the neighbors pulling out of driveways, the world moving on like nothing had changed. But everything had. And I didn't know what to do next. The treatment room was a box of white light, too bright, like someone had scrubbed every shadow out of it. I sat in a recliner that creaked under my weight, a thin blanket draped over my lap, staring at the 4 lines snaking into my arm. The drip was slow, steady, a rhythm I couldn't ignore. My head still spun from the diagnosis a week ago, lymphoma, stage 2, treatable, but today was the first real step, the first day of chemo. I'd pictured this moment differently, thought I'd have someone here, someone to make it feel less like I was falling into a void. I glanced at the chair next to me, plastic and empty, its cushion untouched. Nobody had come. I'd called my brother yesterday, told him the treatment started today. He sighed, said work was crazy, a big project he couldn't step away from. You get it, right? He said, and I nodded into the phone, even though he couldn't see me. My dad was next. I left a voicemail, kept it short, date, time, place. He texted back later. Hospitals aren't my thing. You're tough. You'll be fine. I read it twice, then put my phone down. I didn't call anyone else. Friends from the firm, guys from chess nights, they'd ask questions, offer pity, make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. So I stopped at her, my wife, the one person I thought would show up without me asking. I'd called her this morning, right before I left for the hospital. She picked up on the 4th ring, her voice bright, like she was mid-laugh. Hey, what's going on? She said, and I heard waves in the background, maybe music. I told her today was the day, the start of everything, that I'd be at the hospital by noon. Silence for a beat. Then she laughed, sharp and strange. Oh, today was the start? I'm at a spa in Positano. It's gorgeous here. My stomach twisted. Positano? Italy? I asked who she was with, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. With him, she said, and before I could process it, his voice cut through, my best friend, the guy I'd known since college, the one who'd stood at our wedding. You'll die soon anyway, he said, laughing like it was a punchline. Why bother showing up? The call ended before I could speak. I stood in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, the room tilting around me. Now, here I was, alone in this sterile cage, the 4 cold in my vein. I looked at the empty chair again, willing it to fill, willing someone to walk through the door, a nurse, a stranger, anyone. But the hallway stayed quiet, just the hum of machines and muffled voices from other rooms. I shifted in the recliner, the blanket slipping to the floor. My hands were clammy, not from the chemo but from the weight of what I'd heard. Her voice, his laugh, the way they'd said it so easily, like I was already gone. I wanted to feel angry, to let it burn through me, but all I had was this hollow ache, like someone had carved out a piece of me and left the edges raw. The nurse came by, checked the 4, asked if I needed anything. I shook my head, kept my eyes on the window. Outside, the world was gray, Boston in late fall, all bare trees and heavy clouds. I tried to focus on that, on the way the branches swayed. Anything but the chair, the phone call, the truth I didn't want to face. I'd built a life I thought was solid, 12 years with her, a home we'd filled with memories, a firm I'd poured my soul into. I trusted him, too, shared beers and secrets, thought he'd have my back. But they were in Positano, laughing, while I sat here with poison dripping into my blood, fighting something I didn't even understand. I closed my eyes, tried to picture something else, our wedding, her smile when we danced, the way she'd tease me about my bad chess moves. But those memories felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Instead, I saw her on a beach, him next to her, their glasses clinking in a toast to something I wasn't part of. My chest tightened, and I gripped the armrests, my knuckles white. The nurse came back, her shoes squeaking on the tile. You okay? She asked, her voice soft, but not pitying. I nodded, didn't trust myself to speak. She adjusted the drip, then left again, and I was alone with that chair, that window, that ache. I thought about calling her again, demanding answers, but what would I say? Why aren't you here? Why is he there? The words felt pointless, like shouting into a storm. I checked my phone instead, nothing. No texts, no missed calls, just a blank screen staring back at me. I set it face down on the tray table, my hands shaking. The 4 bag was half empty now, the drip still steady, counting out seconds I couldn't get back. I wondered what Dr. Kaplan would say if I told him nobody came, if I admitted I was doing this alone. He'd probably nod, say something about resilience, but I didn't feel resilient. I felt like a man who'd build a house only to watch it burn. The session ended after what felt like hours, though the clock said less. The nurse unhooked me, taped a bandage over the needle mark, told me to drink water and rest. I thanked her, my voice rough, and stood on legs that felt unsteady, like they'd forgotten how to carry me. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and walked out of the room, past the empty chair, into the hallway that smelled like antiseptic and regret. The hospital doors hissed open, and the cold hit me again, sharper this time. I stood on the sidewalk, watching cars crawl by, people moving through their day like nothing had changed. But everything had. I hailed a cab, climbed in, and gave the driver my address. As we pulled away, I looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing against the dusk. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just turned my face to the window and let the city blur past, wondering how I'd gotten here and what I was supposed to do now. The cab ride home from the hospital felt like it took years, the city lights smearing past the window like a painting left out in the rain. My arm ached where the Ford had been, a dull throb that kept me anchored to the moment, to the truth that chemo had started and nobody had been there to see it. I leaned my head against the cool glass, the driver's radio humming some talk show I didn't care to hear. I kept replaying that phone call, her voice, bright and careless, his laugh cutting through like a blade. Positano. They were in Positano, and I was here, alone, with lymphoma and an empty chair beside me. The cab pulled up to the house, and I paid the driver, my hands clumsy with exhaustion. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the front door, not ready to walk through it but knowing I had nowhere else to go. Inside, the silence hit me like a wave. No clatter of dishes, no hum of the TV, no footsteps on the hardwood. I dropped my coat on the rack, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the hallway, listening to the house breathe. It felt wrong, like a place I'd wandered into by mistake. I moved to the kitchen, hoping for something normal, a half-finished coffee cup, a note, anything to prove she'd been here, that 12 years meant something. But the counter was bare except for a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. My stomach sank as I picked it up, her handwriting sharp against the white. "We all deserve happiness," it said. "You always made everything about you." No signature, no apology, just those words, like a door slamming shut. I read it again, then set it down, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. I walked to the bedroom, the stairs creaking under my weight. Her side of the closet was half empty, dresses gone, shoes missing, the hangers swinging slightly, like they'd been disturbed and left to settle. Her suitcase wasn't under the bed. Her jewelry box set open on the dresser, a few cheap bracelets left behind, the good stuff taken. I stood there, staring at the space she'd left, and felt the ache in my chest spread, not sharp but heavy, like a stone I'd have to carry. She was gone. Not just in Positano, not just for a week. She'd walked out, and that note was all I got. I sank onto the bed, the mattress dipping under me, and let my eyes drift to the ceiling. I didn't cry. I wanted to, thought I should, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I saw flashes of us, her laughing at my bad cooking, me fixing her car in the rain, the way we'd planned a future that felt certain. Had it always been a lie? I thought about him, too, my best friend, the guy who'd crashed on our couch after his divorce, who'd toasted our anniversaries with cheap wine. His voice on the phone, "You'll die soon anyway," played on a loop, each word a nail in a coffin I wasn't ready to lie in. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms, and forced myself to breathe, to think, to move. I got up, grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, and started packing. Not much, just clothes, a toothbrush, my laptop, the chess set I'd had since college. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay here, in this house that felt like a museum of a life I didn't have anymore. I moved through the rooms, turning off lights, locking windows, each step deliberate, like I was sealing something shut. In the den, I paused at the bookshelf, my fingers brushing the spine of a journal I'd kept in college, back when I wrote stories, back when I thought I'd be something more than a guy with a firm and a mortgage. I slipped it into the bag, not sure why. Downstairs, I stood at the front door, the key heavy in my hand. I looked back at the living room, the couch where we'd watched old movies, the table where we'd argued over bills. It wasn't mine anymore, not really. I locked the door behind me, stepped into the night, and walked to my car. The air was sharp, the street quiet except for a dog barking somewhere far off. I tossed the bag in the back seat, slid behind the wheel, and drove, no destination, just motion, the road stretching out like a question I couldn't answer. The city gave way to suburbs, then to highways, the signs blurring as I pushed north. My phone sat silent in the cup holder. No calls, no texts, nothing to pull me back. I thought about the hospital, the empty chair, the way the nurse had looked at me, not with pity, but with something closer to respect. I thought about Dr. Kaplan, his calm voice saying treatable, and I held on to that, let it steady me. I wasn't dying, not today, not tomorrow, but I was done living for people who didn't show up. Hours later, I stopped at a gas station, the neon lights harsh against the dark. I filled the tank, bought a coffee that tasted like ash, and stood in the parking lot, the steam rising from the cup. My body ached, not just from the chemo, but from the weight of everything, her note, his laugh, the life I'd thought I'd built. I looked at the road ahead, the horizon just starting to lighten, and made a choice. I wouldn't go back, not to that house, not to those people. I'd find somewhere new, somewhere I could breathe, somewhere I could be more than a diagnosis or a betrayal. I got back in the car, the engine humming to life, and drove toward the dawn. The duffel bag rattled in the back seat, the journal inside it a quiet reminder of who I'd been before all this. I didn't know what came next, another treatment, another town, another chance, but I knew I wasn't staying still. I disappeared, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And for the first time in days, that felt like enough. The cottage smelled of salt and old wood, a small place tucked on the edge of Harriston, a coastal town in Maine I'd picked almost by accident. I'd been driving for days after leaving Boston, sleeping in my car, eating at diners where nobody asked questions. Something about the quiet of this place, the way the ocean hissed against the rocks, the way the streets felt untouched by time, made me stop. I rented the cottage from a gray-haired woman who didn't care about my past, just my deposit. I signed the lease as Cal, a name I gave without thinking, and moved in with nothing but a duffel bag and a chess set. That was 3 weeks ago, and already the ache in my chest felt softer, like a bruise starting to fade. I woke early most days, the light slipping through thin curtains, the air sharp with sea breeze. My body was adjusting to the chemo, still tired, still sore, but stronger than I'd expected. I'd found a clinic nearby, a small place where nobody knew me, and Dr. Kaplan had arranged to transfer my care. He didn't ask why I'd left, just said he'd keep my secret. Focus on healing, he told me over the phone, and I was trying, not just my body but the rest of me, the parts that hurt worse than the lymphoma ever could. I didn't check my phone anymore. No messages came, and I didn't want them to. The life I'd left was gone, and I was building something new, piece by piece. Mornings, I walked to the harbor, the gravel crunching under my boots. The town was small, just a grocery store, a diner, a hardware store where I'd started working part-time. The owner, a guy with hands like leather, didn't care about resumes. Show up, do the job, he said, and I did, stocking shelves, cutting keys, sweeping sawdust from the floor. Nobody called me by my old name. Nobody asked why I was here. They just nodded, handed me a coffee, let me be. It was simple, and simple was what I needed, something to hold on to while the rest of me figured out how to keep going. Afternoons, I wrote. I'd found that journal from college in my bag, its pages yellowed, filled with stories I barely remembered writing. Sitting at the cottage's wobbly table, I started again, not stories this time, but something else. Thoughts, memories, pieces of the man I'd been and the one I was becoming. The words came slowly, clumsy at first, but they felt honest, like clearing out a room that had been locked too long. I wrote about the hospital, the empty chair, the note on the counter. I wrote about her, too, and him, though I kept their faces blurry, not ready to let them sharpen. Writing wasn't about fixing anything. It was about seeing it, holding it up to the light. The town helped, too. Harriston wasn't much, but it had a rhythm I could follow. I'd sit on a bench by the water, watching fishing boats bob in the fog, their motors coughing as they headed out. Sometimes I'd play chess against myself, the board set up on the cottage's porch, moving pieces while gulls screamed overhead. I didn't win, but I didn't lose either, just kept playing, like it was a conversation I wasn't ready to end. My body was holding up, the treatments less brutal than I'd feared. The clinic's nurse, a woman with a quick smile, said my counts were good, better than expected. You're a fighter, she told me, and I shrugged, not sure I believed her, but glad she thought so. Evenings, I cooked, nothing fancy, just eggs, fish, whatever I could manage without burning. The cottage's stove was ancient, the kind that ticked like a bomb before it lit, but I liked the challenge, like the smell of butter sizzling in a pan. I ate alone, the radio playing old songs I didn't sing along to. After, I'd walk the beach, the sand cold under my feet, the waves chewing at the shore. I'd think about Boston, the firm I'd built, the house I'd locked behind me. I didn't miss it, not exactly, but it was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I'd think about her, to wonder where she was, if she'd read that note and regretted it, if she even cared. I didn't hate her. I didn't hate him either. I just didn't want them in my head anymore. One night, I sat on the porch, a blanket over my shoulders, the chessboard in front of me. The air was thick with fog, the kind that made everything feel closer, quieter. I moved a pawn, then a knight, playing both sides like always. My hands were steady, no shakes, no weakness, and I realized I felt good, not just okay, but good, like I'd crossed some line I hadn't seen coming. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and looked out at the dark, the ocean a low hum beyond the mist. I wasn't fixed, not even close, but I was here, breathing, writing, working, living in a way I hadn't thought possible a month ago. I thought about Dr. Kaplan, the way he'd said treatable, like it was a promise. I thought about the hardware store, the guys who'd started calling me Cal without a second thought. I thought about the journal, the pages filling up, the words that didn't hurt as much to write anymore. I didn't need pity, didn't need anyone to save me. I needed this, Harrison, the cottage, the quiet that let me hear my own thoughts. I'd disappeared to find something, and maybe I was starting to. Not answers, not yet, but purpose, a reason to get up each day. I stood, stretched, and carried the chessboard inside. The cottage was warm, the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. I set the board on the table, left the game unfinished, and grabbed my journal instead. I wrote one line before bed. I'm not running anymore. It felt true, not just words, but a weight lifting, a choice made. I closed the book, turned off the light, and lay down, the ocean's pulse steady outside. Sleep came easy that night, no dreams, no ghosts, just the kind of rest that felt like starting over. The cottage was quiet except for the faint scratch of my pen against paper, the journal open on the table as I scribbled another line about Harrison's fog, how it wrapped the town like a secret. 6 months had passed since I'd left Boston, since I'd locked the door on that old life and driven north to start over. My body was stronger now, the chemo sessions less draining, my hair even starting to grow back, thin but stubborn. I'd settled into this place, working at the hardware store, writing most nights, walking the beach when my head got too loud. But today wasn't for writing stories or stocking shelves. Today was for settling something else, something I'd been putting off too long. I closed the journal, grabbed my keys, and headed to the payphone down the street, the only way I'd talked to anyone from before. I'd found a lawyer in Portland, a guy named Giles Rayner, through a clinic nurse who'd heard me mention needing someone discreet. I didn't want anyone from Boston, anyone who might know my face or my firm. Giles was older, sharp, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. I'd called him a week ago, told him I wanted to update my will, and he hadn't blinked when I said I was Cal, not the name on my old documents. People start over, he'd said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Now, standing in the chilly booth, coins clinking as I dialed, I felt a strange calm, like I was finally taking control of something I'd let slip away. Giles picked up on the second ring, his voice steady, professional. I told him I was ready to finalize the changes we'd discussed, that I'd drive down tomorrow to sign the papers. He asked if I was sure, said he'd never seen someone cut so many people out of their life so cleanly. I didn't laugh, didn't argue, just said I was sure. I'd thought about it for weeks, lying awake in the cottage, listening to the waves while my mind sorted through the past. I didn't want to leave anything to her, not after the note, not after Positano. I didn't want to leave anything to him, either, the guy who'd laughed and said I'd die soon. My brother, my dad. They'd had their chance to show up, and they hadn't. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about knowing who mattered. I told Giles about the scholarship fund, something I'd been turning over in my head for a while. I wanted it in my mother's name. She'd been gone 10 years, but she'd always believed in second chances, in helping people find their way. The fund would go to kids who couldn't afford college, kids like I'd been once, scraping by on loans and late-night shifts. Giles said it was a good idea, that he'd make sure it was set up right. I thanked him, then paused, my breath fogging in the booth. There was one more thing. I wanted to leave something for the nurse from Boston, the one who'd brought me tea that first day of chemo, who'd sat with me when nobody else had. She showed up. I told him, my voice quieter than I meant. That's what matters. Giles didn't ask questions, Just said he'd add her to the list, and we'd go over the details tomorrow. I hung up, the receiver cold against my hand, and stepped out into the wind. The street was empty, Harriston's shop shuttered for the evening, the harbor lights flickering in the distance. I walked back to the cottage, my boots scuffing the pavement, my mind clearer than it had been in months. Making the will wasn't about death. I wasn't afraid of that, not anymore. It was about choosing what I left behind, about making sure the people who'd walked away didn't get to claim pieces of me they hadn't earned. Back inside, I lit the stove, the flame hissing as I set a pot of water to boil. I'd gotten better at cooking, nothing fancy, but enough to keep me going. Pasta tonight, with some garlic and oil from the store. The routine grounded me, kept my hands busy while my head worked through what I'd just done. I'd cut them out, all of them, and it didn't feel heavy like I'd thought it would. It felt right, like shedding a coat that never fit. I stirred the pasta, the steam rising, and thought about the nurse again, her quiet kindness, the way she'd seen me shaking and hadn't made a big deal of it. I didn't know her well, didn't even know her last name, but I'd find out through Giles. She deserved something for being there when nobody else was. I ate at the table, the radio off, the only sound the creak of the cottage and the distant ocean. After, I opened the journal again, not to write but to read, flipping through pages I'd filled since coming here. They weren't polished, just raw thoughts about the empty chair, the note, the way the sea looked at dawn. Reading them now, I saw a man I was starting to recognize, someone who wasn't defined by who'd left him but by what he was building instead. I closed the book, leaned back in the chair, and let that sink in. I wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. I was choosing Harriston, choosing the hardware store, choosing who got to carry my name forward. Before bed, I set up the chessboard, a habit I hadn't shaken. I played a few moves, white against black, no rush to finish. The pieces felt solid in my hand, familiar, like they were part of me. I thought about tomorrow, the drive to Portland, the papers I'd sign. I thought about the scholarship fund, the kids it might help, the way my mother's name would mean something again. I thought about the nurse, too, and hoped she'd understand why I'd included her, that it wasn't charity but gratitude, a way to say thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. I left the game half done, the board a quiet promise I'd come back to it. The cottage was dark now, just the glow of a lamp by the bed. I lay down, the mattress creaking, and listened to the waves outside, their rhythm steady, unbroken. Sleep came easier these days, not heavy but light, like I was finally carrying less. I'd made my choices today, and they weren't about fear or anger. They were about purpose, about leaving something good behind. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The fog hung thick over Boston as I stepped out of the rental car, my boots sinking slightly into the damp pavement of the parking lot. It had been over a year since I'd left this city, since I'd locked the door on my old life and driven north to Harriston. I wasn't back to stay, just a day, a meeting, a chance to see what had become of the world I'd walked away from. I'd set it up carefully, using a shell identity Giles had helped me create, a client named Evan Cole with vague ties to a consulting firm. Nobody would know it was me, not the people at my old company, not the ones who'd stopped showing up when I needed them most. I adjusted my coat, a plain one I'd bought in Maine, and walked toward the glass building that used to be mine. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee and polished stone, the same as it always had. I kept my head down, my cap low, and signed in at the desk as Evan, my handwriting deliberately messy. The receptionist didn't look twice, just handed me a visitor badge and pointed to the elevators. My chest tightened as I rode up to the 15th floor, not from fear but from the strangeness of it. Being here, a ghost in my own past. The doors opened, and I stepped into the office I'd built, the firm I'd poured years into, now buzzing with people who didn't know I was watching. I was led to a conference room, its long table gleaming under fluorescent lights, and told to wait for the CEO. I sat, my hands folded, and braced myself for what came next. He walked in 10 minutes later, his suit sharp, his smile sharper. My best friend, or he had been, back when I thought loyalty meant something. Now he was CEO, running the company I'd started, the one he'd saved after I disappeared. He didn't recognize me, didn't even glance at my face as he launched into a pitch about the firm's growth, tossing out numbers like confetti. I nodded, asked questions as Evan Cole, kept my voice steady even as my pulse hammered. His words were smooth, practiced, but I saw the cracks, the way his eyes flicked to his phone, the way he leaned back like he owned the room and everything in it. I trusted him once, shared drinks and dreams, let him into my home. Now he sat across from me, bragging about my work like it was his. The meeting dragged on, his voice a drone I barely heard. My mind kept slipping to that phone call, his laugh from Positano, the way he'd said I'd die soon. I wanted to lean across the table, tell him I was alive, watch his face collapse. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, let him talk, let him think he'd won. When he offered to show me the office, I agreed, curious to see how much had changed. We walked through the open plan space, past desks and screens, past people I'd hired who didn't look up. Then I saw her, standing by a window, her hair catching the light. My wife, or she had been, before the note, before she left me to face chemo alone. She was laughing with someone, her hand brushing their arm, and I saw the watch on her wrist, the one I'd given her for our 5th anniversary, its silver band glinting like a promise she'd broken. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking, kept my face blank as Evan Cole. She didn't see me, didn't feel my eyes on her. I overheard her mention Italy, a wedding they were planning, her voice bright with a happiness that used to be mine. I looked at him, leading me through the office, and realized they were together now, building a life on the ashes of the one they'd burned. I didn't flinch, didn't falter, just nodded at his tour, my hands in my pockets, my heart a steady beat I could control. We ended back at the conference room, and he shook my hand, said he hoped Evan Cole would invest, that the firm was stronger than ever. I smiled, said I'd think it over, and left without another word. The elevator ride down felt like falling, not because I was hurt, but because I wasn't. I'd expected pain, anger, something sharp to cut through me. Instead, I felt nothing, just a quiet certainty that I didn't belong here anymore. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the city in gray. I walked to the car, slid behind the wheel, and sat for a moment, the badge still clipped to my coat. I unhooked it, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and drove away, the building shrinking in the rearview. The road out of Boston was familiar, but I wasn't the man who'd driven it last. I thought about Harrison, the cottage, the hardware store where nobody asked questions. I thought about my journal, the pages I'd filled with words that felt like mine again. I thought about the will I'd signed with Giles, the scholarship fund, the nurse I'd left something for because she'd shown up when nobody else had. Seeing them, her, him, the life they'd stolen hadn't broken me. It had shown me how far I'd come, how little I needed them now. I stopped at a diner an hour out, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that burned your tongue. I sat in a booth, ordered a sandwich I didn't eat, and stared out the window at the highway stretching into the dark. My phone sat untouched in my pocket. No calls, no texts, no reason to check. I didn't want to tell anyone about today, not even Giles. This was mine, a piece of the past I'd faced and walked away from. I paid the bill, left a tip, and got back in the car, the engine humming as I pointed it north. Harrison was waiting, with its fog and its quiet, its waves that didn't care who I'd been. By the time I reached the cottage, the stars were out, sharp against the black. I unlocked the door, dropped my keys on the table, and stood in the dark, listening to the ocean's pulse. I didn't need to write tonight, didn't need to play chess or walk the beach. I'd gone back, seen what I needed to see, and come home whole. That was enough. I kicked off my boots, lay on the bed, and let the night carry me to sleep. No ghosts, no regrets, just the steady rhythm of a life I was building on my own terms. The cottage was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen, the cursor blinking as I stared at the email I'd just written. It was simple, just a subject line, medical clearance, and an attachment, a scan of my remission report from the clinic in Harrison. Below that, a video file, one I'd recorded earlier that night, my face leaner than it used to be, my voice steady as I said, "I'm not dead." I never was. I'd sat on the porch for an hour after filming it, the ocean muttering in the distance, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Sending this wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, about letting them know I'd survived without them. My finger hovered over the send button, and then I clicked, the screen flashing as the email went to her, my wife, the one who'd left me with a note and a laugh from Positano. I closed the laptop, stood, and went to bed, the weight of it already lifting. By morning, I was in my car, driving south from Harrison, the road cutting through fog and pine. I'd planned this trip carefully, a quiet return to Boston, not to confront anyone, not to make a scene, but to see what happened when the email landed. I didn't expect much, didn't need to, but I wanted to be there, close enough to feel the ripple. I checked into a small hotel on the city's edge, a place where nobody asked questions, and by 9 I was at a cafe across from our old house, the one I'd locked and left over a year ago. I sat by the window, a coffee untouched in front of me, My cap pulled low. The street was quiet, just dog walkers and delivery vans. The house looking smaller than I remembered, its paint peeling at the edges. At 9:14, a black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the house, the door flying open before it fully parked. She stumbled out, barefoot, her hair wild, her voice sharp as it cut through the morning air. Kieran, Kieran, where are you? She ran to the front door, pounding on it, her fists leaving smudges on the glass. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something colder, like watching a stranger unravel. She yelled my name again, her voice breaking, and I realized she thought I was inside, thought I'd come back to that house, to her. She didn't know I'd disappeared for good, didn't know I'd built something new without her. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding me, and kept my eyes on her, steady, unmoved. She fumbled with her phone, dialed, waited, then threw it onto the grass, cursing. A neighbor peered out, then ducked back inside, probably calling someone to complain. I leaned back in my chair, the cafe's hum, clinking mugs, low chatter, fading as I watched her pace the lawn, her hands tugging at her hair. She looked smaller, too, not the woman who'd laughed in Positano, not the one who'd worn my watch while planning a new wedding. This was someone else, someone caught off guard, someone who'd thought I was a ghost until my email proved I wasn't. I didn't smile, didn't feel the urge to. I just watched, letting the moment settle, letting it be what it was. A car pulled up minutes later, my brother climbing out, his face pale, his coat unbuttoned like he'd rushed over. He grabbed her arm, said something I couldn't hear, his head shaking. She yanked away, pointed at the house, kept shouting my name until her voice cracked. I caught his words this time, faint through the cafe window. He's not here. He can't be. She sank to her knees, her hands covering her face, and he stood over her, looking lost, like a man who'd misread the map. I set my cup down, my fingers steady, and felt the pieces click together. They believed I was gone, not just left but dead, and my email had torn that apart. I didn't need to hear more, didn't need to walk across the street. I'd seen enough. I paid for the coffee, left a tip, and slipped out the cafe's side door, my cap still low. The air was sharp, Boston's late fall biting at my knuckles as I walked to my car. I drove slow, no rush, the city unfolding around me, brick buildings, bare trees, people moving through their day like nothing had changed. But something had, not for them, but for me. I'd sent the email to close a door, to let her know I wasn't the man she'd walked away from. I didn't need her panic, her tears, didn't need her to beg or explain. I'd needed her to see I was alive, and now she had. That was all I'd come for. The hotel room was dim when I got back, the curtains half drawn. I sat on the bed, my bag untouched by the door, and thought about Harriston, the cottage waiting with its creaky stove and half-finished chess games. I thought about the hardware store, the guys who called me Cal, the journal I'd fill tonight when I got home. I didn't check my phone, knew it'd be flooded soon, her number, maybe his, maybe others who'd hear the story and want to pull me back. I didn't want that. I built something better, something mine, and this trip was just a line under the past, a way to say I'd faced it and walked away whole. I left Boston that afternoon, the highway stretching north, the fog thinning as I neared Maine. The radio stayed off the sill. I saw her again in my mind, barefoot on the lawn, her voice raw, but it didn't hurt like I'd thought it would. It didn't feel like victory either, just a fact, something done. I'd survived lymphoma, survived her, survived him, and I'd done it without them. The road curved toward Harriston, the ocean's smell sneaking through the vents, and I felt the pull of home. Not the house I'd left, but the life I'd made, the one that fit me now. By dusk, I was back, the cottage dark until I flicked on the lamp. I dropped my keys on the table, kicked off my boots, and stood for a moment, listening to the waves outside. I didn't need to write yet, didn't need to unpack. I'd gone to Boston, sent the email, seen what I needed to see, and come back stronger. That was enough. I lay down, the bed creaking, and let the ocean carry me to sleep. No dreams, just the quiet of a man who knew where he belonged. The morning after I got back from Boston, Harriston felt quieter than usual, the fog thick enough to muffle the harbor's usual clatter. I sat at the cottage's table, a mug of coffee warming my hands, staring at the laptop I hadn't opened since sending that email. I knew what was coming, messages, calls, maybe more, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. I'd seen her panic on the lawn, heard my brother's shaken voice, and that was enough for now. I'd gone to the city to close a chapter, not to start a fight, and whatever happened next wasn't mine to control. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness steadying me, and tried to focus on the day ahead. Work at the hardware store, maybe some writing later, but my mind kept drifting back to her, to the way she'd screamed my name like it could bring me back. By noon, I was at the store, sweeping sawdust from the floor, the familiar rhythm of the job grounding me. The bell above the door jingled, and I nodded at a regular, a guy buying nails for a deck he'd been building all fall. Nobody here knew about Boston, about the email, about the life I'd left behind. They just called me Cal, asked about paint or screws, and let me be. I liked that, liked the simplicity of it, the way it let me breathe. But the quiet didn't last. My phone, tucked in my back pocket, buzzed once, then again, then kept going until I couldn't ignore it. I stepped behind the counter, checked the screen, and saw a flood of notifications, texts, emails, voicemails, most from numbers I hadn't seen in over a year. I turned the phone off, shoved it back in my pocket, and went back to sweeping, my jaw tight. I didn't need to read them to know what they'd say. Her voice, desperate or angry, demanding to know where I was. My brother, probably fumbling for excuses, acting like he'd cared all along. Maybe even him, the guy who'd laughed in Positano, trying to spin some story to save face. I didn't care. I'd sent the email to show I was alive, not to invite them back in. But the world doesn't always let you walk away clean. When I got home that evening, I called Giles, the lawyer who'd helped me disappear. He answered on the first ring, his voice dry but warm. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said, and I could hear him smiling. I asked what he meant, though I already had a guess. He told me she'd broken into the old house, thinking I was inside. Not just knocked, smashed the door down, splintered the frame, left it hanging off its hinges. She'd fallen to her knees when she found it empty, sobbing, screaming my name until the neighbors called the cops. My brother showed up, pale as a sheet, muttering about the estate, about how they'd been dividing it, thinking I was dead. I leaned against the cottage wall, the phone heavy in my hand, and listened as Giles laid it out. The story had spread, first to the neighbors, then to the local news, then further. "Man returns after being presumed dead," the headline said, and now my inbox was a mess, my phone a brick of noise I didn't want to touch. Giles laughed, a short bark of a sound. "You ready for this next part?" he asked. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and said I was. I'd waited long enough. I hung up, stood on the porch, and let the ocean's hum fill the silence. The fog was lifting, stars poking through, and I felt a strange calm, like I'd known this was coming. They'd thought I was gone, built their plans on it, and now I'd pulled the ground out from under them. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I'd survived, because I'd chosen to live without them. I went inside, grabbed my journal, and wrote a single line. They broke the door, but I'm not there. It wasn't poetry, just truth, and it steadied me as I closed the book and set it aside. The next day, the story grew louder. I saw it on a newspaper at the store, my old name in bold, a blurry photo from years ago next to a shot of the house, its door taped shut. Customers didn't notice me flinch, didn't connect the quiet guy stacking lumber with the man in the headlines. I kept working, kept my head down, but the weight of it followed me home. I turned my phone back on, just long enough to see the messages, dozens from her, pleading, then angry, then pleading again. My brother, saying we needed to talk. A reporter, asking for a statement. I deleted them all, powered it off, and left it on the table. I didn't know them answers. I'd said what I needed to say with that email, with the video that showed my face, alive and unafraid. That night, I sat on the beach, the sand cold under my boots, the waves chewing at the shore. I thought about the house, the door she'd broken, the life she'd thought she could claim. I thought about my brother, his voice shaking, realizing I wasn't a name on a will anymore. I thought about Giles, the way he'd laughed, like he'd known I'd handle this. I didn't feel angry, didn't feel sad. Just clear, like the fog had burned off inside me, too. I'd disappeared to find myself, and I had. Harriston, the cottage, the hardware store, the journal, they were mine, more real than anything I'd left behind. I stood, brushed the sand off my hands, and walked back to the cottage. The chessboard sat on the table, a game I'd left half-played. I moved a pawn, then a bishop, not caring who won, just liking the feel of the pieces, the way they fit my hand. I didn't need to run anymore, didn't need to hide. The world knew I was alive, and that was enough. Whatever came next, more headlines, more calls, I'd face it as Cal, as the man I'd become, not the one they'd left behind. I turned off the lamp, lay down, and let the ocean's rhythm pull me to sleep, steady and sure. No ghosts to keep me awake. The air in the conference room was cool, almost too cool, the kind that makes you sit up straighter even when you're not sure you want to be there. I stood at the front, a simple podium between me and a small crowd. Reporters, a few locals, Giles in the back with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. It had been a week since the headlines broke, since she'd smashed the door of the old house, and the world decided my return was a story worth telling. I'd agreed to this press event, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I needed to set the record straight. Not for her, not for him, not even for my brother, just for me, to say what I'd been carrying since that first day of chemo when nobody showed up. I adjusted the microphone, cleared my throat, and started talking, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I told them about the diagnosis. Lymphoma, stage 2, treatable but terrifying, the kind of thing that makes you rethink everything. I told them about the hospital, the bright room, the 4-drip, the chair beside me that stayed empty. I didn't linger on her absence, didn't name her or him, didn't need to. The story wasn't about who left, it was about who stayed, about the people who walked with me when I could barely walk myself. I mentioned the nurse, the one who'd brought me tea that first day, who'd sat with me not because it was her job, but because she saw I was alone. I mentioned Giles, the lawyer who'd helped me disappear, who'd kept my secrets without asking for anything in return. I mentioned Dr. Kaplan, the doctor who'd said treatable, and meant it, who'd guided me through the fog of treatment with a calm I could lean on. The people who walk with you in pain, I said, they're your real family. The room was quiet, pens scratching, cameras clicking softly. I didn't look at the faces, didn't try to read them. I just kept going, talking about Harriston, the cottage, the hardware store where I was just Cal, a guy who swept sawdust and cut keys. I talked about writing again, not for fame but for clarity, a way to make sense of the pieces I'd been handed. I told them I wasn't here to shame anyone, wasn't here to point fingers. I'd come back to Boston to show I was alive, to let the truth breathe, and now I was telling it, plain and simple, so I could move on. I didn't mention the email, the remission report, the video I'd sent her. I didn't need to, they'd already made their own story out of that. When I finished, a reporter asked if I'd forgive them, my wife, my friend, my family. I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted the words to land right. Forgiveness isn't the point, I said. I don't carry them anymore. Another asked what came next, and I smiled, just a little. I go home, I said, and left it at that. I stepped away from the podium, the room buzzing as I walked out, Giles falling in step beside me. He didn't say much, just clapped my shoulder and said, "You did good." I nodded, my chest lighter, like I'd set down something heavy I'd been holding too long. Outside, the city hummed, cars crawling, horns faint in the distance. I drove back to Harriston that afternoon, the road familiar now, the pines and fog welcoming me home. The cottage was waiting, its windows dark until I flicked on the lamp. I didn't check my phone, didn't turn on the radio to hear what people were saying. I'd said my piece, and that was enough. But later that night, Giles called, his voice crackling through the line. He told me about the lawsuits, his, caught up in legal mess they hadn't seen coming. Embezzlement, identity theft, insurance fraud, all tied to their attempt to declare me dead while I was still breathing. They'd moved fast after I disappeared, thinking I wouldn't come back, thinking they could claim what I'd left behind. My return had unraveled it all, and now they were facing consequences I hadn't planned but couldn't ignore. I listened, standing on the porch, the ocean's rhythm steady behind me. I didn't feel joy at their trouble, didn't feel anger either, just a quiet understanding that choices catch up, always. I'd made mine, leaving Boston, building a life in Harriston, writing my truth, and they'd made theirs, thinking I was a name they could erase. Giles said the lawsuits didn't need me, that the evidence was enough, and I was glad. I didn't want to sit in courtrooms, didn't want to face them again. I'd faced enough in that cafe, watching her scream my name, and in that conference room, telling my story to strangers. I thanked Giles, hung up, and went inside, the cottage warm against the night's chill. I set up the chessboard, moved a few pieces, not playing to win but just to feel the game, the way it always calmed me. I thought about the nurse, hoped she'd hear I'd mentioned her, hoped she'd know it wasn't flattery but gratitude. I thought about Dr. Kaplan, wondered if he'd watched the press event, if he'd nodded at the parts about healing. I thought about Harrison, the hardware store, the guys who'd never know I'd stood at a podium today. That was okay. They didn't need to. They knew me as Cal, and that was the man I wanted to be now, not the one in the headlines, not the one who'd been left behind. I wrote in my journal before bed, not about the press event, but about the ocean, how it sounded tonight, how it didn't care about my past or my name. The words came easy, like they'd been waiting. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and lay down, the mattress creaking under me. The lawsuits, the headlines, the people I'd left, they were out there, spinning their own stories, but they weren't mine anymore. I told the truth, not to hurt them, but to free myself, and it had worked. Sleep came fast, the ocean's pulse carrying me under, no dreams, just the kind of rest that feels like peace, like home, like a life I'd chosen and wouldn't trade. The hill above Harriston's harbor was steep, but I liked the climb, the way my boots sank into the soft earth, the way the wind carried the ocean's salt and sting. It was late afternoon, 3 years since I'd left Boston, 3 years since the diagnosis, the empty chair, the note that ended one life and started another. I stood at the top now, looking down at the water, its surface catching the last of the sun's light like scattered coins. Beside me, the nurse from that first chemo day held my hand, her fingers warm against mine. We weren't married, didn't need to be, her presence was enough, steady and real, a choice we'd both made without promises or rings. I breathed deep, the air sharp, and felt my heart settle, not healed but full, stronger than I'd thought it could be. The years in Harriston had changed me, carved me into someone I recognized now, someone I liked. The cottage was still home, its creaky stove and wobbly table as familiar as my own hands. I still worked at the hardware store, though the owner had me managing orders now, trusting me with more than just sweeping sawdust. I wrote most nights, not just in the journal but a book, the chair beside me, that had found its way to shelves after a small press took a chance on it. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it sold quietly, steadily, readers finding something in my story, lymphoma, betrayal, starting over, that echoed their own. I didn't read the reviews, didn't need to. Writing it had been enough, a way to lay the past down without burying it. My cancer was gone, had been for over 2 years, the clinic's test showing clear scans each time. I still went for checkups, still felt a flicker of nerves before each one, but the fear wasn't what it used to be. Dr. Kaplan had called after my last visit, his voice warm through the phone. "You're a stubborn one," he'd said, and I'd laughed, because maybe I was. Not stubborn enough to hold grudges, though. I'd let go of her, of him, of the brother who'd shown up too late. They weren't part of me anymore, just names in a story I'd told and moved past. The lawsuits Giles mentioned had played out without me, their consequences a distant hum I didn't need to hear. I glanced at her, standing beside me, her hair catching the wind. She'd come to Harriston a year ago, not chasing me but visiting a friend, and we'd run into each other at the diner. Her smile the same as it had been that day in the hospital. We talked, then kept talking over coffee, over walks, over quiet nights when words weren't needed. She knew me, not as the man in the headlines or the book, but as Cal, the guy who burned toast and played chess badly. She'd stayed, not because I asked, but because she wanted to, and that was more than I'd ever thought I'd have again. The harbor below was busy, boats coming in, their motors buzzing like insects. I thought about the scholarship fund I'd set up in my mother's name, the letters I'd gotten from kids it had helped, awkward thank yous, stories of colleges they'd never thought they'd reach. It wasn't much, but it was something, a piece of good I could leave behind. I thought about Giles, too, still in Portland, still checking in now and then, his dry laugh a reminder of how far I'd come. I thought about the hardware store guys, who'd thrown me a quiet birthday last month, just beers and a cake they'd clearly baked themselves, lopsided but honest. A letter had arrived last week, her handwriting on the envelope, postmarked from somewhere I didn't care to know. It sat unopened on my desk, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to read it. Whatever she had to say, apologies, excuses, regrets, it wasn't mine to carry. I'd found peace without her words, without her story. I'd mail it back tomorrow, unmarked, a quiet way to say I was done. The wind picked up, tugging at my coat, and I squeezed her hand, anchoring myself to the moment, to the hill, to the life I'd built from nothing. We started down the path, the harbor fading behind us as we headed to the cottage. I'd cook tonight fish, maybe, with potatoes I'd finally learned not to overcook. She teased me about the stove, the way it ticked like a bomb, and we'd eat at the table, the chessboard pushed to one side. I'd write later, not about the past, but about this. The hill, the water, the way her laugh sounded when I got the recipe wrong. The book had been my way of letting go, but these new pages were about holding on, about keeping what mattered close. Back at the cottage, I unlocked the door, the familiar creak welcoming us in. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her coat on the chair, and started the kettle, her ease in my space a quiet gift. I stood by the window, watching the last light drain from the sky, the ocean at dark hum beyond the glass. I didn't need to look at the letter, didn't need to check my phone or the news. The world out there could spin its stories, I had mine, and it was enough. I learned who showed up when the light was dim, who stayed when the shadows stretched long. She was one of them, and so was I, stubborn enough to keep going, to find joy in the small things, a walk, a meal, a hand to hold. I turned from the window, saw her setting mugs on the counter, and smiled, not big but real. Fish tonight? I asked, and she nodded, already pulling out the pan like we'd done this 100 times. We had, and we'd do it 100 more, not because we had to but because we wanted to. I moved to the stove, lit the burner, and let the warmth spread, the cottage alive with the sounds of us, her humming, the kettle whistling, my knife on the cutting board. The letter sat untouched, the past silent, the present loud and bright. I'd found my home, not in a place but in the people who stayed, in the life I'd chosen. And as the fish sizzled, the ocean outside steady as ever, I knew I'd keep choosing it, every day, for as long as I had.